Hi everyone, this week's online lecture is all about agility, performance, and change of direction speed. Before we begin, we need to recall those goals of our training plan, those generic goals that we set at the beginning of the semester. Firstly, we want to prevent injuries. So anything that we're going to train in regards to agility has to be to prevent injuries within the sport. Second of all, it's about system tolerance, developing system tolerance and capacity. That means exposing the athlete to agility that they're going to experience within the game to build their ability to be able to do those movement patterns. And then lastly, the last performance outcome is really a change in performance. And hopefully you can actually see an improvement in performance by doing agility-based drills. There are two factors that affect agility performance. The first being change of direction ability and perceptual cognitive ability. And we're going to define each of those on the coming slides. Let's start by defining change of direction ability. And really, it's fairly self-explanatory based on what we're trying to define. Change of direction ability. It's the ability to change direction. Well, it's multifaceted, and it comes down to a combination of the ability to decelerate, reorient the body to face or partially face the direction of intended travel, and then explosively reaccelerating. And that really is the combination of that defines change of direction ability. As we know, this is constantly happening in team sport activities. Specifically, an athlete pivots and goes into an opposite direction. They're decelerating, stopping, and then reaccelerating in the opposite direction. That is all about change of direction ability. The second factor that affects agility performance is an individual's perceptual cognitive ability, and this is composed of several factors. One being the athlete's ability to use their eyes and scan the situation, which is known as visual scanning, as well as reading the play, which is anticipating what's going to happen next. Pattern recognition, knowledge of the situation, and how fast you are at decision making and the accuracy of that decision making, along with reaction time. And these factors, a combination of these, make up an individual's perceptual cognitive ability and their ability to be able to read and react to a situation. So now let's discuss how we assess agility and change of direction and how we're able to develop these areas. Here on table 19.2 is aspects of agility tested or trained in various drills and tests. As you can see on the left side, we see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 tests that are used for various measures. You can see in the other columns exactly what the priority is. So the first 4 are mostly strong in change of direction speed. The last 3 are really targeting more maneuverability. And then the first one also has the ability to assess perceptual cognitive ability. And this is the ability to visually analyze and anticipate a situation. The reactive agility test is very short. It's less than 3 seconds. So the metabolic requirement here is really your ATP stores that are within your muscle. Anything less than about 5 seconds is really your ATP stores as well as your phosphocreatine system. As you can see, the higher the time requirement, so up to 12 seconds for both the T-test and the Illinois agility test, these are more trained adaptations, and these require longer training sessions in order to acquire the chronic adaptation. And you can see that in the asterisk down below, that the length of the test has a large influence on the metabolic requirements and whether changes in test performance can become a function of enhanced conditioning rather than just a change of direction or agility ability. So lots of things to consider here. And these are the primary tests that we use to firstly assess the baseline agility and change of direction speed, and which you can use these also for training, prescription, and then you retest them with these same tests and monitor their adaptations to agility, to change of direction speed, to maneuverability, as well as to their perceptual cognitive ability. If I wanted to pick a test that assessed an individual's change of direction speed and perceptual cognitive ability, I would choose the reactive agility test. However, if I wanted to assess an individual's change of direction speed, I could use both the reactive agility test, the 505, and the pro agility test, what would give me a good indication of the person's change of direction speed. Also, you could use the T-test, which has maneuverability as well. But if you solely want to look at maneuverability, you would look at, or you would pick the Illinois Ability Test or the L-Run to assess that. And those are roughly less than 6 seconds or less than 12 seconds in duration. So you want to pick the test that most closely reflects the demands that are placed on the athlete during their sport. And use that one as baseline testing, but then use it for retests as well. Before we continue, I want to make it really clear that the difference between agility and speed is that agility requires the development of perceptual cognitive abilities in addition to change of direction. So someone could be really, really fast, and fast in a linear standpoint, but also in a change of direction standpoint. But the ability to develop perceptual cognitive abilities is defined as agility. And so there's 2 points here. Firstly, athletes improve COD ability through development of a number of physical factors and technical skills during a variety of speeds and modes of movement. We know that. But the second part is the development of agility also requires improving the PC abilities in relation to the demands of the sport. So you have to assess in your needs analysis, what are the perceptual cognitive abilities of that athlete? Do they need to anticipate? Do they need read and react and incorporate that with change of direction speed? And if so, that's an agility aspect of performance that you need to develop. With that in mind, there are 3 main training goals when we're looking at developing agility and change of direction speed. Firstly, you want to enhance the perceptual cognitive ability in various situations and tactical scenarios, which we'll talk about on the coming slides, and how to do that. The second aspect is to develop the effective and rapid braking of one's momentum. And thirdly is the rapid reacceleration towards the new direction of travel. Those are the 3 main training goals in order to effectively develop agility and change of direction speed. If we focus solely on developing agility, there are 3 main methods of developing agility. First of all is developing strength, so that we're able to apply a greater force to the ground and therefore accelerate faster. So relative strength is very important, which we'll talk about on the next slide in table 19.4. The second method of developing agility is developing change of direction ability. And we'll see that in 2 slides from now on table 19.5. And then thirdly is developing the perceptual cognitive ability. And this is agility exercises should begin by adding a perceptual cognitive component to common closed skill change of direction drills. So what does this mean? Well, when you're doing decelerations or the Z drill, these can evolve into agility drills through inclusion of a generic stimulus such as a whistle, a coach command saying stop or go, or a flashing arrow or a light telling the athlete which direction they should go. So there's a change of direction, but they have to be able to identify it through their brain and make the connection from their brain to their muscles to change. And that's the perceptual cognitive ability, where you have to read and react and anticipate based on a whistle, based on a coach's command, based on a flashing arrow, or whatever the stimulus may be. That's the perceptual cognitive piece that's very important to developing agility. And you see this in some athletes. You see that some athletes are very fast, but they're not necessarily agile. And some athletes are the opposite of that, agile but not as fast. And the agility comes by reading and reacting to the situation. You're perceiving what's happening in the scenario and you're reacting based on that. And that's called perceptual cognitive ability. And that's the ability to anticipate, read and react to a situation, which is extremely important in team-based sports. Table 19.4 is a fantastic comparison of focus for agility development in both novice and advanced athletes. The first thing I want you to be able to do is classify your athlete's agility status. And this really comes down to assessing them and talking to them. Have they done any agility development before? And if they haven't, then you want to classify them as potentially novice. And then you say, okay, have you had experience in the weight room with resistance training? If the answer is yes, then they would be advanced in the weight room, but a novice for field and court-based drills. Okay, so you can train them differently in the weight room than you do on the field. So in this case, for dynamic strength, if an individual is classified as a novice athlete in regards to agility development, then you would get them to do body awareness work on the field, such as leaning drills. But however, if they're advanced in the gym for dynamic strength, then you would get them to do squats and pulls for variations of those. Okay, so it all comes down to progression and regression depending on the status of your athlete, the training status. If they have had experience with agility development, then they would be, and you trust it and you've assessed them and you've seen that their movement kinetics are good, then they would be classified as an advanced athlete for field and court-based drills. Okay, and then based on their classification for resistance training, then you dictate whether they're a novice athlete or advanced in the weight room. You should also see from this chart that there are 6 strength requirements for developing agility. One is dynamic strength, one is concentric explosive strength, one is eccentric strength, one is reactive strength, multi-directional strength, and lastly, perceptive cognitive abilities. And you can see in each column, it provides examples of how to develop that strength requirement for novice athletes in the weight room, novice athletes in the field, advanced athletes in the weight room, and advanced athletes in the field. I want to draw your attention to the bottom for the perceptual cognitive abilities. There's nothing that can be trained really in the gym. However, in the field, there's simple reaction drills, introduction to increases either temporal or spatial uncertainties. And then for advanced athletes, you can do small-sided games, agility drills with severely restricted temporal and spatial aspects, okay, where the person has to make cognitive decision-making while they're doing things fast and being agile. Okay, that's the perceptual cognitive piece that's added to make agility agility. Otherwise, if you remove that perceptual cognitive ability, all your training is speed. So ultimately, this table really provides a good progression regression and should direct agility-based development in your athletes. Table 19.5 is a fantastic table to really showcase the progression and regression depending on the training status of your athlete. Okay, so the first thing you want to classify is the agility training status. Have they had prior experience? If so, how much? And if they've had a lot, what exactly have they done? And that all comes from developing that initial rapport with your client and finding this out verbally, and then assessing them to see their movement patterns and see how they do, classifying them based on a gap analysis for agility, and then classify them as a beginner, intermediate, or advanced based on their training results, their testing results. Okay, so as you can see, the agility component, change of direction, maneuverability, and agility with beginner skills to develop, intermediate skills, and advanced skills. And remember that the classification of the training status is so important because it really helps in preventing injuries and setting your athlete up for success. Remember, as I mentioned in class, it is all about progressive overload. You do not want to overload them right away, overload their body right away, because that can lead to injuries. Err on the side of caution, begin them as a beginner, classify them as a beginner, and then progress them faster if necessary, or keep them there until they've developed the proper movement abilities. Now let's look into a needs analysis for agility development. This is for the sport of basketball. So in this case, they define the time frame. They've had 12 weeks in this person's schedule. It's 8 weeks of off season and 4 weeks preseason for training, so 12 weeks total. They've identified 3 key performance elements that are prioritized. So firstly, it's high velocity changes of direction that need to be established for backdoor cuts, cuts through the lane, fast break, and possessionary changes. The second one is maneuverability, and this is multiple modes of change of direction movement. And the third one is agility through perceptual cognitive enhancement. And this is working on decision-making time, agility to move in reaction to play or opponents. After the sport-specific agility needs analysis has been done, they recommended tests or assessments to determine the individual's agility level. So this was the 505 test, the T-test, and the agility test with decision time measured. Okay, so they used that. And then the next step was to provide a preliminary plan for transition of percentage distribution through the training blocks. And as you can see down below, we have change of direction as a primary aim, maneuverability as a secondary aim, and agility, the perceptual cognitive, as a tertiary aim, the third aim. Okay, and you can see in each block that they've set aside for training, which is approximately 4 weeks. So 3 blocks of 4 weeks is 12 weeks total. The first block, 65% of it will be focused on change of direction as a primary aim. And then you can see in block 1, 35% is maneuverability, and block 1 for agility, there's none associated with developing perceptual cognitive until a firm foundation of change of direction and maneuverability has been established. So then we move to block 2. 60% of the time for agility development will be on change of direction, 30% maneuverability, and 20% for the perceptual cognitive agility piece. The third block, as we're moving closer to the competition season, we've reduced the amount of time for change of direction, reduce maneuverability, and increase the perceptual cognitive ability. So this is really pairing up and tapering the individual to be ready for the main season, where in basketball itself, you're going to be doing a lot of perceptual cognitive agility, and so they want to develop that closer to the season. This slide provides an excellent example of how you would do sport-specific agility assessment, and this is the steps that are involved. Defining the sport, the time frame, the specific agility needs analysis, the recommended tests, and developing kind of a planned distribution of the training blocks. Based on the last slide, we can see that it's really a phasic approach to agility development, that you have phases in which you have focused attention to a key performance factor before moving on to the next. But you can combine specific key performance factors. It's just a proportional change. The first thing you want to do is establish the primary aim for each training block based on the sport and athlete gap analysis. And then what you do is you test and retest to assess progression before advancing to the next block. So as you can see on the right here, we have a diagram that shows the blocks and emphasis. Block 1 has a primary and secondary aim. The primary aim is change of direction in a linear standpoint. The secondary aim is maneuverability. So all the training tools and the notes and the load prescription is based on those two primary and secondary aims. In block 2, the primary aim is relatively the same, change of direction. However, now we're working on lateral development. The first block we looked at change of direction in linear development. The secondary aim is still the same, maneuverability, but you're changing up a few key variables to develop there based on what you learned in block 1. Block 3, the primary aim again is change of direction, but now we're working on effective deceleration to reacceleration. The secondary aim is maneuverability, but the tertiary aim we've added, and this is agility, the perceptual cognitive ability. And then the training tools and notes and the load prescriptions are specific to what the focus, the block focus and emphasis is. So how do we know whether a person has adapted to our training program? Well, there's 5 main factors that can be assessed to monitor agility development: change of direction, deficit, ground contact time, exit velocity, entry velocity, and decision-making time. You can see the description and interpretation in table 19.7, which I want you to read. But for me, not being redundant and reading them to you, I want you to do that on your own. But essentially, these 5 factors are ways in which we can assess, in addition to our baseline tests, retesting, that can determine whether the person has developed and is tracking well with our training program. One way in which we can do that is through the implementation of testing on a track and using timing gates, which are set up sequentially to monitor entry, exit velocities, as well as decision-making time when you've stopped, as well as it can measure change of direction deficits and ground contact time. So that's one way in which you can monitor agility development. So now let's put it all together. And here's a strategy to develop change of direction and agility in the athletes you're working with. The first step is you want to perform the sport needs analysis and athlete assessment. And you want to match the tests and assessments as closely to what they're doing in the sport and their sport-related demands. The step 2, which you all know, is doing the gap analysis. So once you've done the testing, now you can compare their results to gold standards and normative standards and determine their strengths and areas of improvement. The third aspect to this is now you can set goals and training direction. So you can, for agility, you can have a primary, secondary, and possibly a tertiary area of development that you can work on all together. It's just the percentage of time that you spend on developing the primary, secondary, and tertiary components will change. Step 4 is you want to distribute the time available for this development based on the need identified. So you've identified your primary, secondary, and tertiary key performance factors that you want to develop, and you distribute the time. So 70% of the time we're working on this, 20% of the time we're working on this, or what have you. But you have to distribute that time available depending on how much available time you have. Do you have 12 weeks? Do you have 6 weeks? Do you have 4 weeks with the people? And that's when you have to develop and set aside the time based on the total time you have working with that individual. Step 5 is provide a preliminary plan for transition percentage distribution through the training blocks. And step 6 is you want to schedule retest times within your preliminary plan to track the athlete adaptation and progress towards the primary goal. Now, those retest times could be every 2 weeks, they could be every 3 weeks, they could be every 4 weeks, but you have to determine with certainty why you want to assess them and how you're going to make the changes based on the results you have. In summary, there are 5 main points. Change of direction ability and perceptual cognitive ability directly affect change of direction and perceptual cognitive performance. Okay, so it's the specificity of training will dictate the outcome. As well, there are 3 areas when we come down to agility that we want to develop. One is relative strength, change of direction ability, and perceptual cognitive ability. When you're making a training plan, it should be a phasic approach, that you have saturation of key performance elements during various phases. And the phases, how the length of the phases will be dictated by how much time you have with that individual. Fourthly, you really want to monitor their development through technical, deceleration and acceleration technique, and specific assessments to identify the improvements. And we talked about those 5 factors. And lastly, there are 6 strategies to develop a solid change of direction and agility training plan with your athlete, which we covered on the last 2 slides. Thanks very much for your attention, and remember to do your online quiz. See you in class.